The sound of cold metal closing around tiny wrists echoed through Sunshine Daycare's colorful main room. 3-year-old Elijah Williams' face crumpled as tears streamed down his cheeks, his small body trembling uncontrollably. The plastic handcuffs meant for adults, but loosely encircling his baby-fat wrists, gleamed under the fluorescent lights as Officer Grantham towered above him. Elijah's cries escalated to heartbreaking wails, his breath coming in terrified gasps that shook his entire body. "Please, please stop this. He's just a baby." Miss Rodriguez, the assistant teacher, dropped to her knees beside Elijah, her voice breaking as she reached toward him, only to have her hand swatted away by the officer's partner. The daycare's rainbow-painted walls and cheerful animal cutouts formed a grotesque backdrop to the scene, unfolding a terrified black toddler in handcuffs, surrounded by uniformed officers, while a small pile of wrapped caramel candies lay scattered on the blue alphabet carpet nearby. "Ma'am, step back. This is police business," Officer Grantham commanded, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. Behind him stood Ms. Kathleen Werner, known informally among staff as Karen, the daycare's newest employee. Her thin lips pressed together in vindication, arms crossed tightly over her chest, as she watched the scene unfold with cold satisfaction in her eyes. "I told you he was stealing," she said sharply to no one in particular. "These children need to learn consequences early." Just 6 hours earlier, that very morning had begun like any other Thursday at the Sunshine Daycare in the suburban neighborhood of Oakwood Gardens. The late September air carried the first hints of autumn as parents dropped off their children between 7:30 and 8:30 a.m. The facility, housed in a converted ranch-style home with a sprawling backyard playground, served about 30 children from various backgrounds, though most families were middle class, and a mix of races that broadly reflected the neighborhood's growing diversity. Tiana Williams, a healthcare administrator at the local hospital, knelt down to give her son Elijah one last hug before heading to work. At 3 years old, he was an energetic boy with wide, curious eyes, deep dimples, and a contagious giggle that often earned him the nickname Sunshine from the staff, a coincidental match to the daycare's name. "Remember your special snack for today?" Tiana asked, patting the small dinosaur print lunch bag. "Grandma's special caramels, just like I promised for being such a good helper yesterday." Elijah nodded eagerly, clutching the lunch bag to his chest. "I share with Marcus?" he asked, referring to his best friend at daycare. "Yes, baby. You can share one with Marcus. But remember, only after lunch like we talked about. These are special treats." She kissed his forehead, the familiar scent of baby shampoo and the coconut oil she used on his tight curls filling her senses. "Mommy loves you. Be good for your teachers." As Tiana handed Elijah over to Miss Rodriguez, a warm, 26-year-old assistant teacher who'd been with Sunshine Daycare for 3 years, she noticed an unfamiliar face watching them from the administrative desk. The woman appeared to be in her mid-50s, with artificially blonde hair pulled into a tight bun that seemed to stretch her pale skin uncomfortably across her sharp features. She wore a navy cardigan, despite the mild weather, and her eyes narrowed slightly as she observed their interaction. "That's Ms. Werner," Miss Rodriguez explained quietly, noticing Tiana's questioning look. "She started Monday. Mrs. Johnson hired her to help with administration and substitute teaching when needed." Tiana nodded politely toward the new employee, who returned only the barest acknowledgement before turning back to her computer screen. Something about the woman's demeanor made Tiana hesitate, but she dismissed the feeling she was already running late for her 8:30 meeting. "His lunch bag has his name on it," Tiana added. "And remember, he has caramels for a special treat today. They're from his grandmother. He's allowed one after lunch. Please, Of course. Miss Rodriguez smiled, giving Elijah's hand a gentle squeeze. We'll make sure he enjoys his special treat at the right time. Tiana left with the familiar mixture of guilt and resolve that working parents often feel, unaware that her son's day would veer into a nightmare within hours. The morning progressed normally with circle time, outdoor play, and art activities. Elijah was particularly proud of his finger painting, creating swirls of blue and green that he insisted was like the ocean at Grandma's house, referring to a recent beach trip. He'd placed his dinosaur lunch bag in his cubby, as instructed, and largely forgotten about it during the morning's activities. Just before lunch, while Miss Rodriguez was occupied helping another child in the bathroom and the lead teacher, Ms. Evans stepped out to take a phone call. Elijah remembered his special treats. Excited, he retrieved his lunch bag and opened it, pulling out the small bag of individually wrapped caramel candies his grandmother had made. The homemade treats were wrapped in clear cellophane with hand-twisted ends, nothing like store-bought candy. But to a 3-year-old, they were treasures. He was admiring them when Ms. Werner entered the room, her rubber-soled shoes silent on the carpet until she was directly behind him. "What do you have there?" The sharp tone made Elijah jump. He turned to find Ms. Werner looming over him, her shadow falling across his small form. "My candy," Elijah replied, his voice small but proud. "From Grandma?" Ms. Werner's eyes narrowed as she snatched the bag from his hands. "Where did you get these?" "These are from our supply cabinet. Did you take these without permission?" Elijah's lower lip trembled. "My candy. In my lunch." He pointed to his dinosaur lunch bag, confusion evident on his face. "Don't lie to me," Ms. Werner snapped, her voice rising. "I know for a fact we have these exact candies in the supply cabinet for next week's fall festival. These are expensive imported caramels. You stole these." By now, other children had stopped their activities to watch. Elijah's eyes filled with tears, unable to understand why the new teacher was accusing him or what stole meant. He reached for his candy, but Ms. Werner held it out of reach. "My mommy said," he began, his voice quavering. "Don't blame your mother for your bad behavior," Ms. Werner interrupted coldly. She grabbed Elijah's arm, pulling him toward the administrative office with surprising force. "We're going to call the director about this." Miss Rodriguez returned to the classroom just as Ms. Werner was dragging a now sobbing Elijah away. "What's happening, Elijah? Are you okay?" "This child was caught stealing expensive candy from the supply cabinet," Ms. Werner declared loudly. "I'm taking him to call Mrs. Johnson." "Wait, those are probably his special treats," Miss Rodriguez protested, moving quickly to intervene. "His mom mentioned he had candies from his grandmother in his lunch today. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding." Ms. Werner's face flushed with indignation. "Are you questioning my judgment? I know what I saw. And I know theft when I see it." "Let's just check his lunch bag," Miss Rodriguez suggested reasonably, reaching for Elijah's dinosaur bag. "I'm sure we can sort this out quickly." "Absolutely not," Ms. Werner said, her voice cold as ice. "This requires proper consequences. Children need to learn that stealing is a crime." What happened next would later be pieced together from security footage and witness statements. While Miss Rodriguez attempted to calm the situation, Ms. Werner locked herself in the administrative office with a still crying Elijah. Instead of calling the daycare director as expected, she dialed 911. "Sunshine Daycare Center. "We have a situation with a child stealing valuable items from our supply cabinet," she reported, her voice steady and deliberate. "I need an officer to respond immediately before the behavior escalates. The child is becoming aggressive." The 911 dispatcher, following protocol for a reported disturbance at a childcare facility, dispatched 2 patrol officers to the scene. When asked for more details about the aggressive behavior, Ms. Werner embellished. "He tried to hit me when confronted. I'm concerned about the safety of the other children." This flagrant lie would later be disproven by security footage, showing a frightened, crying Elijah attempting only to retrieve his candies while being forcibly restrained by Ms. Werner. Outside the office, Miss Rodriguez frantically called the daycare director, Mrs. Johnson, who was at a regional early childhood education conference 20 miles away. "Something terrible is happening," she explained hurriedly. "Ms. Werner has locked herself in the office with Elijah Williams over some candy she thinks he stole. But his mother specifically mentioned he had special treats today. And now I think she's called someone, maybe the police." Mrs. Johnson, a veteran childcare professional with over 20 years of experience, immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. "Keep trying to get into that office. I'm leaving the conference now. And call Elijah's parents immediately." But before Miss Rodriguez could reach Tiana Williams, 2 police cruisers pulled into the daycare parking lot, lights flashing but sirens silent. Officer Grantham, a stocky white man in his 40s with a military-style haircut, and his partner, Officer Reynolds, a younger officer fresh from the academy, entered the building just as Ms. Werner emerged from the office, still gripping Elijah's arm. "Thank goodness you're here," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "This child was caught stealing expensive items, and when confronted, he became defiant and attempted to assault me." Elijah, exhausted from crying and utterly confused, could only hiccup out broken protests. "My candy," Mommy said. "Grandma." Officer Grantham surveyed the scene, a sobbing black toddler, a seemingly concerned white staff member, and what appeared to be scattered candies, and made a series of fateful decisions that would later be scrutinized in an internal affairs investigation. Without asking for identification or verification of Ms. Werner's role or authority, without reviewing security footage, without contacting parents or the daycare director, without even questioning other staff members like Miss Rodriguez, who was frantically trying to intervene, Officer Grantham decided to treat the situation as an actual crime scene. "Son, did you take something that wasn't yours?" he asked Elijah, his voice stern and authoritative in a way that only terrified the child further. Elijah, unable to process what was happening, simply cried harder and reached for Miss Rodriguez, who had finally pushed her way into the confrontation. "This is all a mistake," she insisted, her voice rising with urgency. "Those are his candies. His mother told me about them this morning. Please. He's just 3 years old." "Ma'am, please step back," Officer Reynolds instructed, physically positioning himself between Miss Rodriguez and Elijah. "We need to get to the bottom of this." What happened next would be captured by the daycare's security cameras and eventually go viral across social media platforms, sparking nationwide outrage. Officer Grantham, interpreting Elijah's frightened crying and reaching for Miss Rodriguez as resistance, made the unconscionable decision to place plastic restraints, essentially zip-tie handcuffs, on the 3-year-old. "This will help you understand the seriousness of taking things that don't belong to you," he stated, as he secured the restraints around Elijah's tiny wrists, ignoring the child's heart-wrenching wails and Miss Rodriguez's horrified protests. And so began the scene that would later headline news reports across the country, A black toddler handcuffed and sobbing on the floor of a daycare center over a handful of homemade candies that were rightfully his. By this time, other staff members had gathered, many recording the incident on their phones despite Ms. Werner's sharp commands to stop. The other children, witnessing their friend's distress, had either started crying themselves or stood frozen in fear. It was into this chaos that Ms. Evans, the lead teacher who had returned from her phone call, entered the room. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. "What in God's name are you doing to that child?" she shouted, rushing toward Elijah. "Take those off him right now." "Ma'am, this is police business," Officer Grantham responded, placing his hand on his holstered weapon in what was later described in witness statements as a threatening manner. Ms. Evans, a 20-year veteran of early childhood education, was undeterred. "This is a 3-year-old child, not a criminal. I don't care if you're the Pope himself. You take those restraints off him this instant, or so help me God. I will have your badge." While this confrontation unfolded, Miss Rodriguez had managed to check Elijah's lunch bag and discovered a note in Tiana's handwriting. "Elijah's special treat. Grandma's homemade caramels. 2. 1 for after lunch. 1 to share with Marcus. Love, Mommy." She thrust the note toward Officer Reynolds. "Read this. This is all a mistake. These are his candies from home." Officer Reynolds hesitated, finally taking the note and showing it to his partner. "Grant, maybe we should—" "Those could be from anything," Ms. Werner interjected quickly. "She probably wrote that after stealing them. I know what our supplies look like." The situation might have continued to deteriorate if not for 2 simultaneous arrivals. Through the front door burst Tiana Williams, her hospital ID badge still hanging around her neck, having left work immediately after receiving Miss Rodriguez's frantic voicemail. And through the back entrance came Mrs. Johnson, the daycare director, who had broken multiple speed limits in her rush back from the conference. The sight that greeted Tiana, her baby boy handcuffed and sobbing on the floor, unleashed a primal reaction that would later be described by witnesses as both heartbreaking and fearsome to behold. "What are you doing to my child?" Her scream cut through the room like a physical force, silencing everyone momentarily. She lunged toward Elijah, only to be intercepted by Officer Reynolds. "Ma'am, you need to calm down." "Don't you dare tell me to calm down when you have my 3-year-old in handcuffs." Tiana's voice broke as she fought to reach her son. "Get those off him. Now he's a baby." Mrs. Johnson, taking in the scene with the quick assessment of an experienced administrator, immediately identified the source of the problem. "Ms. Werner, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her normally gentle voice sharp with authority. "I caught this boy stealing expensive candies from our supply cabinet," Ms. Werner replied, though with noticeably less confidence now that her superior had arrived. "I was simply enforcing proper discipline." By calling armed police on a toddler, Mrs. Johnson's incredulity was palpable. She turned to the officers. "Remove those restraints immediately. This child has committed no crime." Officer Grantham hesitated, caught between maintaining his authority and recognizing the growing evidence that a serious error had been made. "Ma'am, we were responding to a report of theft and potential assault." "Those candies are from my mother," Tiana shouted, tears streaming down her face as she continued trying to reach Elijah. "I told the staff this morning. They're homemade caramels for his special treat. What is wrong with you people?" The turning point came when Ms. Evans, who had retrieved the security footage on her tablet, thrust the screen in front of Officer Grantham. "Watch this," she demanded, This shows Ms. Werner taking the candies from Elijah's hands, him crying, and her dragging him away. There was no aggression from this child. None. Officer Reynolds, who had been increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, finally intervened. "Grant, we need to take these off," he said quietly, already moving toward Elijah to remove the restraints. As the plastic cuffs were removed from his tiny wrists, leaving faint red marks where they had dug into his skin, Elijah launched himself toward his mother with a heart-wrenching cry. Tiana gathered him into her arms, her body shaking with sobs as she rocked him back and forth, examining his wrists and whispering broken reassurances into his ear. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. Mommy's here now. You're safe. You didn't do anything wrong." The aftermath unfolded with the strange mixture of chaos and formality that follows catastrophic errors. Mrs. Johnson ordered Ms. Werner to the office while apologizing profusely to Tiana. Officer Grantham, realizing the magnitude of his mistake, attempted to justify his actions through procedure. "We were responding to a reported theft and assault." "He is 3!" Tiana screamed, still clutching Elijah to her chest. "What kind of monster puts handcuffs on a baby over candy? Look at his wrists." The marks on Elijah's wrists, though not severe, spoke volumes about the disproportion between alleged offense and response. Mrs. Johnson immediately called the daycare's lawyer and board chair. Miss Rodriguez, still shaken, helped gather Elijah's belongings while Ms. Evans organized the remaining children and called their parents for early pickup, recognizing that the day was irretrievably disrupted. By mid-afternoon, the incident had begun spreading on social media. One of the daycare workers had captured video of Elijah in handcuffs and his mother's arrival on her phone. And despite Ms. Werner's attempts to prevent recording, the footage had found its way to Instagram and Twitter. The initial posts, with captions like, "Police handcuff 3YO black child over candy at Sunshine Daycare," garnered thousands of shares within hours. As Tiana took Elijah to the emergency room to have his wrists examined more for documentation than medical necessity, she received call after call from friends, family, and eventually, local media. Her brother, Marcus Williams Sr., an attorney specializing in civil rights cases, arrived at the hospital within an hour, his face tight with controlled fury. "I've already filed for the complete security footage from the daycare," he informed his sister as they sat in the examination room. Elijah finally sleeping from emotional exhaustion in Tiana's arms. "And I've contacted the department requesting the officer's body cam footage. This isn't going away. Tiana, not this time." Tiana, stroking Elijah's hair, nodded numbly. "He kept asking me what he did wrong. Marcus, he kept saying, 'Sorry for candy,' Mommy over and over. What do I tell him? How do I explain this?" Marcus placed a gentle hand on his sister's shoulder. "You tell him he did nothing wrong, that some adults made terrible mistakes today, and then we make damn sure those adults face consequences for what they did to him." While Tiana focused on Elijah's immediate well-being, Marcus worked his phone, contacting community organizers, local NAACP representatives, and fellow attorneys. By that evening, a protest was being organized for the following day, outside both the Sunshine Daycare Center and the police department. The police department, sensing the growing public relations disaster, issued a statement by 6 p.m. The Oakwood Gardens Police Department is aware of an incident at Sunshine Daycare Center involving officers and a young child. We take all community concerns seriously and are reviewing the matter internally. The officers involved have been placed on administrative duty pending review. This tepid response only fueled greater outrage as the video continued to spread nationally. By 9 p.m., cable news networks had picked up the story, with split-screen images of Elijah in handcuffs juxtaposed with official statements. Social media exploded with hashtags, Josh, Justice for Elijah, Handcuffed at 3, and G, Sunshine Shame. Meanwhile, at her modest apartment 20 minutes from the daycare, Ms. Werner was experiencing the first ripples of consequences. Mrs. Johnson had suspended her pending termination proceedings and instructed her not to speak to the media. But Kathleen Werner, convinced of her own righteousness, had already given a brief statement to a local reporter. "I was simply protecting the other children and our property. Rules need to be enforced consistently, regardless of who breaks them." This statement, so tone-deaf to the gravity of what had transpired, only added fuel to the growing firestorm. Internet sleuths quickly uncovered Ms. Werner's social media history, a catalog of racially charged posts and complaints about children today having no discipline. By midnight, her full name was trending alongside calls for criminal charges for child endangerment. The next morning dawned bright and clear, belying the storm of human emotions gathering. By 7 a.m., a crowd had begun to form outside Sunshine Daycare, which had announced an emergency closure. Parents of children who attended the center, community members, and activists stood shoulder to shoulder with homemade signs, "Black children are children too," "Handcuffs are not for babies," and "Fire Karen now." At 10 a.m., as the crowd swelled to over 200 people, Tiana Williams arrived with Elijah, her parents, and her brother. The sight of the small boy, his eyes still showing the confusion and fear from the previous day's trauma, caused a hush to fall over the gathered protesters before erupting in supportive chants and calls for justice. Marcus Williams, stepping forward to address the crowd and the assembled media, spoke with the controlled precision of an experienced attorney. "Yesterday, my 3-year-old nephew was criminalized, traumatized, and assaulted, yes. Assaulted by those meant to care for and protect him. A daycare worker called armed police because a black child had candy that his grandmother made. Candy that was rightfully his. And those officers, without questioning, without investigation, placed a 3-year-old child in handcuffs." His voice rising with controlled emotion, he continued, "Today, we demand immediate termination of Ms. Kathleen Werner from Sunshine Daycare. We demand disciplinary action against the officers involved. We demand a formal apology from both institutions. And we put this community on notice. This ends now. The criminalization of black childhood ends today. In this place." The crowd's response was thunderous, their applause and cheers echoing down the street as news helicopters circled overhead, capturing the scene for national broadcasts. What no one expected was what happened next. From inside the daycare emerged Mrs. Johnson, flanked by the board chair and several staff members, including Miss Rodriguez and Ms. Evans. Her face was drawn with emotion as she approached the microphone that had been set up for speakers. "I have been the director of Sunshine Daycare for 17 years, she began, her voice steady despite her evident distress. "In that time, I have dedicated my life to creating a safe, nurturing environment where all children can thrive regardless of race, background, or circumstance. Yesterday, we failed catastrophically in that mission." She turned directly to face Tiana and Elijah. "Ms. Williams, there are no words adequate to express our remorse for what happened to Elijah in our care. As of this morning, Ms. Werner's employment has been terminated, effective immediately. We have provided all security footage to your attorney and to the authorities investigating this incident. And while I know it cannot undo the harm caused, I want you and everyone here to know that Sunshine Daycare will be implementing immediate and comprehensive changes to our hiring practices, staff training, and emergency procedures. The crowd murmured, some appreciative of the accountability, others skeptical of promises without specific actions. Mrs. Johnson continued, her voice breaking slightly. I would also like to recognize the staff members who advocated for Elijah during this incident, particularly Ms. Rodriguez and Ms. Evans, who put themselves between a child and armed officers. They represent the true values of childcare professionals. This acknowledgement drew applause, and Ms. Rodriguez stepped forward, tears streaming down her face as she addressed Tiana directly. I'm so sorry we couldn't protect him better. I will never stop being sorry for that. The raw emotion of the moment shifted the energy of the protest. As Mrs. Johnson and her staff retreated back into the building to continue their emergency planning, the focus of the crowd turned toward the police department, where a second demonstration was planned for noon. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Grantham sat in the chief's office, watching the news coverage with a growing sense of dread. Chief Morris, a 30-year veteran who had been working to improve community relations, didn't mince words. What the hell were you thinking? Putting restraints on a toddler over candy? The chief's voice was low, but charged with fury. Do you have any idea what you've done? Not just to that child, not just to his family, but to every officer in this department who's been working to build trust in the community. Officer Grantham shifted uncomfortably. Sir, we were responding to a report of theft and potential assault. Stop. Chief Morris cut him off sharply. I've reviewed your body cam footage. At no point did you attempt to verify the staff member's claims. At no point did you consider the age of the child involved. At no point did you attempt de-escalation. You went straight to restraints on a 3-year-old. A 3-year-old. The chief pushed a folder across the desk. Effective immediately. You're on administrative leave, pending a full internal affairs investigation. I'm also recommending you for psychological evaluation and mandatory retraining on juvenile interaction protocols if you still have a job when this is over. As Officer Grantham left the office, Officer Reynolds was called in next. The younger officer, who had been visibly uncomfortable during the incident and had ultimately removed Elijah's restraints, faced a different conversation. You knew what was happening was wrong, Chief Morris stated bluntly. I saw it in your body cam footage, but you deferred to your senior officer instead of doing what was right immediately. That's a failure of moral courage. Reynolds. Yes, sir. Officer Reynolds responded, his face flushed with shame. I should have acted sooner. You're also on administrative leave, but I'm putting you with community services when you return. You're going to spend 6 months working directly with early childhood centers on appropriate police interaction. Maybe that will help you find your backbone when it comes to protecting the vulnerable. By noon, the protest had relocated to police headquarters, growing to nearly 500 people. The energy was more confrontational here, with chants of, "Who do you protect? Who do you serve?" echoing off the building's concrete facade. Marcus Williams again addressed the crowd, this time announcing that they had secured pro bono representation from a prestigious civil rights firm and would be filing suit against both the daycare and the police department that afternoon. What changed the tenor of the day was the unexpected emergence of Chief Morris from the building. Unlike many officials who might hide during controversy, he approached the microphone with a somber expression. I'm not here to make excuses, he began, immediately silencing the crowd with his directness. What happened to Elijah Williams yesterday represents a fundamental failure of judgment, training, and basic humanity on the part of our officers. As chief, I take responsibility for that failure." He paused, making direct eye contact with Tiana, who stood at the front of the crowd. Elijah now asleep against her shoulder, emotionally exhausted from the continuing turmoil. "Ms. Williams, I have 3 grandsons. I cannot imagine the pain and fear you experienced seeing your child in restraints. Both officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and I have personally recommended disciplinary action to the Oversight Board. But more importantly, I want to look you in the eye and tell you, we failed your son. We failed you. And we are committed to making this right, not just with words, but with meaningful actions and policy changes." The chief's unusual candor momentarily stunned the crowd. In a community accustomed to defensive statements and bureaucratic deflection, his direct acknowledgement of wrongdoing was unexpected. Marcus Williams stepped forward. "Actions speak louder than words. Chief, what specific changes will prevent this from happening to another child?" "Fair question," Chief Morris responded. "By end of day tomorrow, we will implement an immediate policy change, prohibiting the use of any restraints on children under 12, except in extreme circumstances involving imminent danger to themselves or others. Additionally, all officers will undergo mandatory retraining on child interaction protocols within 30 days. And I'm establishing a community oversight committee specifically focused on police interactions with minors, with positions reserved for parents, educators, and child development experts." These concrete commitments, delivered without the usual qualifying language of bureaucracy, shifted the protests' energy again. While skepticism remained justified by a history of broken promises, there was also a cautious sense that this incident might actually drive substantive change. As the day progressed, national attention continued to grow. Major civil rights organizations issued statements of support for the Williams family. Social media campaigns organized donations for Elijah's future therapy, needs, and education. And perhaps most impactfully, parents across the country began sharing their own stories of children, particularly children of color, being over-disciplined, criminalized, and traumatized in educational settings. By evening, what had begun as a local incident had transformed into a national conversation about the adultification of Black children, the tendency to see them as older, less innocent, and more culpable than their white peers, and how this bias plays out in schools, daycares, and law enforcement interactions. For Kathleen Werner, the consequences were swift and severe. Beyond losing her job, she faced potential charges of filing a false police report and child endangerment. Her previous employment history revealed a pattern of concerning incidents, including 2 prior terminations from schools for excessive disciplinary measures, information that had been missed in Sunshine Daycare's hiring process due to insufficient background checking. 3 days after the incident, as media attention remained intense, an unexpected development occurred. Tiana Williams, after much reflection and discussion with her family, agreed to a meeting facilitated by a community reconciliation specialist. Present were Mrs. Johnson and the daycare board, Chief Morris, Officer Reynolds, though not Officer Grantham, who had declined to participate, and, most surprisingly, several other parents from the daycare, including those of Marcus, Elijah's best friend. The meeting, held in a community center conference room, began with tense silence. Tiana, still visibly exhausted from the emotional toll of the week, spoke first. "I didn't come here to accept apologies," she began, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly. "I came because what happened to my son is happening to Black children everywhere, every day. Maybe not with handcuffs, but with suspensions, expulsions, police calls, and the message that they are threats rather than children. I'm here because Elijah asked me this morning, "Mommy, can I still have candy?" That's what this has done to my 3-year-old. He thinks enjoying a treat his grandmother made him might put him in handcuffs again. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Mrs. Johnson wiped tears from her eyes, while Chief Morris stared at his clasped hands. "I'm here," Tiana continued, "because Elijah loves his teachers, Miss Rodriguez and Ms. Evans, and his friends. I'm here because I need to work, and he needs childcare. And mostly, I'm here because running away from this place wouldn't solve the bigger problem. So I want to know, what are you going to do to make sure no child, regardless of their color, ever experiences this again?" What followed was 4 hours of difficult, honest conversation that would later be described by participants as both painful and transformative. Parents shared experiences of racial bias their children had faced. Staff members acknowledged blind spots in their training and protocols. Police representatives confronted uncomfortable truths about differential treatment based on race. And concrete plans were developed, not vague promises of doing better, but specific, measurable changes to policies, procedures, and oversight. By the end of the meeting, a framework had been established. Sunshine Daycare would implement comprehensive bias training for all staff, revise their hiring procedures to include more thorough background checks, create a parent advisory board with emphasis on diverse representation, and establish clear protocols for handling behavioral issues that explicitly prohibited involving law enforcement, except in cases of imminent danger. The police department committed to expanding their already planned policy changes, adding mandatory community service hours in educational settings for all officers, and creating a specialized unit trained specifically in child-centered approaches to any situations involving minors. Most significantly, both institutions agreed to regular public accountability meetings, where they would report progress on these commitments and hear community feedback. 1 week after the incident, Elijah returned to Sunshine Daycare, not because all problems had been solved, but because Tiana made the difficult decision that running away would teach him the wrong lesson. His return was marked by a small ceremony where the children, guided by Miss Rodriguez, presented him with drawings and gentle hugs. Ms. Evans had prepared a special circle time story about speaking up when something is wrong and protecting friends, and Mrs. Johnson, kneeling to Elijah's eye level, presented him with a small box. "These are special treats for you and all your friends," she explained softly, "because sharing joy is what we should be about." Inside were individually wrapped caramels, store-bought this time, but selected with the specific intention of giving Elijah a new, positive association with the candy that had been at the center of his trauma. The look of hesitation on his face broke hearts around the room, but with his mother's encouraging nod, he carefully took one candy and then, with growing confidence, began to distribute them to his friends. When he reached Marcus, his best friend threw small arms around him in a fierce hug that brought tears to every adult eye witnessing it. "I saved you candy," Marcus said solemnly, producing a slightly squashed caramel from his pocket, one he had apparently been saving since before the incident. "Teacher said wait for you come back." This simple act of childhood loyalty, a friend saving candy for a friend, provided a poignant counterpoint to the adult failures that had surrounded the incident. In that moment, watching the two boys carefully unwrap their treats together, giggling over sticky fingers, Tiana felt the first real hope that Elijah might eventually move past the trauma. The legal proceedings continued. Of course, Marcus Williams and the civil rights attorneys filed lawsuits that would eventually result in significant settlements from both the city and the daycare's insurance. Officer Grantham was ultimately terminated from the force following the internal investigation, while Officer Reynolds completed his retraining and became an advocate for police reform in juvenile interactions. Kathleen Werner faced misdemeanor charges for filing a false police report and would eventually receive probation and community service. Though many in the community felt the consequences were insufficient, given the harm caused. More meaningful than these individual outcomes, however, were the systemic changes catalyzed by the incident. Within 6 months, 17 daycare and preschool centers in the region had adopted similar bias training and disciplinary protocols. The police department's new policies on interactions with minors became a model adopted by 3 neighboring jurisdictions. And a state legislator, moved by Elijah's story, introduced a bill prohibiting the use of restraints on children under 12 in all but the most extreme circumstances, legislation that would eventually pass and become known informally as Elijah's Law. For Elijah himself, the path to healing was neither simple nor linear. He worked with a child psychologist specializing in trauma, using play therapy to process his experiences. There were nightmares, moments of unexpected fear around authority figures, and questions that no 3-year-old should have to ask. But there was also resilience, supported by a mother who turned her pain into purpose, and a community that, however imperfectly, committed to learning from its failures. 1 year after the incident, Sunshine Daycare held a community celebration marking the implementation of all their promised changes. The playground had been renovated, the curriculum updated to include age-appropriate discussions of fairness and standing up for others, and the staff now reflected the diversity of the children they served. In the bright sunshine of that September afternoon, children played on new equipment while parents, staff, and community members shared food and conversation. Chief Morris, now recognized as a vocal advocate for police reform and juvenile interactions, chatted with Marcus Williams about the progress of their joint community advisory board. Mrs. Johnson, recently honored with an Early Childhood Leadership Award for her transformation of the center post-crisis, moved among the families, her genuine warmth restored after a year of determined work to rebuild trust. Tiana, watching Elijah race around the playground with his friends, felt the complex emotions of a parent who has seen her child wounded by the world, but also witnessed his healing. When he ran to her, face flushed with excitement, holding out a slightly melted chocolate to share, she embraced him with the fierce protection that had fueled a year of advocacy and change. "Mommy, I gave candy to everyone," he announced proudly, chocolate smeared across his cheek. At 4 years old now, his memories of the incident had softened around the edges, though the psychological support would continue for years to ensure deeper impacts were addressed. "That's wonderful, baby," she replied, wiping his face with a napkin. "Sharing makes everyone happy, doesn't it?" He nodded solemnly before racing back to his friends, the sun catching the highlights in his curls as he ran. Just a child. Being a child, as he always should have been allowed to be. Tiana felt a presence beside her and turned to find Miss Rodriguez, now promoted to lead teacher, watching Elijah with the same mixture of sorrow and hope that Tiana often felt. "He's doing so well," Miss Rodriguez said softly. "All the children are, but especially him." Tiana nodded, words momentarily beyond her, as she thought about the journey of the past year, the pain that should never have happened, but also the changes that might not have come without it. "We still have so far to go," she finally replied, watching as children of all colors played together. Parents chatted across social boundaries, that might previously have separated them, and community leaders who had once been adversaries now work together. But at least now we're walking in the right direction. As if to punctuate her words, Elijah's laugh rang out across the playground, bright, uninhibited, and healing in its simple joy. One small boy's trauma had become a community's awakening, a painful but necessary step toward creating a world where children like him could safely be exactly what they were: children, deserving of protection, presumptions of innocence, and the freedom to enjoy a grandmother's homemade caramels without fear. And in that laughter, in its resilience and hope, lay the most important lesson of all, that even the deepest wounds could heal when met with justice, accountability, and a community's unwavering commitment to do better for all its children.